There we go. Okay, welcome back to the joint hearing of House Human Services and House Judiciary Committee. Education and oversight on juvenile justice. Before we have the next witnesses from the Department of Children and Families, just real quickly, we did talk a little bit about raise the age, the last witness. This hearing is really more focused on just broadly juvenile justice, looking at other issues that we may want to pay attention to. Next week, we've already planned on Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to have probably a lot of the same witnesses, but we're going to, actually just the Judiciary Committee, we'll be digging really into the raise the age issue. And I do understand that the administration has a proposal related to that. And we will definitely look at that and other issues related to that specific issue, the April 1st raise the age to 19. But today and tomorrow, we're really trying to get ourselves educated about generally the juvenile justice system, including youthful offender. With that, I'll welcome the commissioner from the Department of Children and Families.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. For the record, my name is Chris Winters. I'm the Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families. And I really first just want to thank you all for taking the time and focus on this really important and complex issue that we have before us. As the chair just mentioned, there was a press conference at noon, and the governor did announce some new proposals regarding public safety, including some elements that touch on juvenile justice. So I think this conversation that you all are having today is going to provide a really great foundation for further conversations around that, to have a better understanding and an informed discussion about juvenile justice issues in the coming weeks. And as the chair promised, we were going to launch right into this early in the session, and here we are. Our hope is that we can all really level set and get a good sense for what the current landscape looks like, how we got here and where we are today, and what's worked well, and what are some other areas that might deserve a fresh look and a reevaluation of some of the efficacy of our current laws, of our current systems and structures that we have for the youth that we serve, and how that balances with public safety. I'm going to keep my remarks very brief and turn it over, with the chair's permission, to the subject matter experts who are with us here today. And I'll still be in the room and available to answer questions as we go, and look forward to the presentation and the many questions I'm sure you'll have.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Just want to see if the slide deck is up.
You're good.
Am I good? Okay. I can't tell if it's advancing. For the record, my name is Kara Karadke, and I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Family Services Division at DCF. As the commissioner said, we really wanted to use today as a way of grounding everybody in youth justice, but also I wanted to take a moment to sort of step back and talk a little bit about the Family Services Division and our mission and the work that we do, because I do see a lot of new faces here today. So the first slide I want to go to is slide number 2.
Almost up.
Slide may be on the back, 1 moment.
Okay.
Could the rest of you, while we're waiting for the slides, come on, introduce yourselves as well for the record?
For the record, I'm Lindy Boudreau. I'm the Adolescent Services Director at Family Services.
Hi, my name's Gary Marvel. I'm the Deputy Director of Field Services at the Department of Corrections.
Great, thank you for being here. Well, I bought you a little time, but it's still not quite.
Thanks for that.
Oh. We've been having technical issues today. Yeah, we're not the energy and technology.
Not the energy though.
Bear with us.
They resorted to duct tape yesterday, as I understand.
Yeah, I did see. So I don't know if that was actually true or. I mean, while we're waiting, should we do introductions of ourselves? We did that this morning, but we'll go ahead again because we have new folks, and we'll go around the room. Mark Malone, representative from South Burlington, chair of the House Judiciary Committee.
Ray Garofano, I live in Essex, also represent Essex Junction. I'm on the Human Services Committee.
Ann Donahue, Northfield, and represent Berlin and Human Services.
Hello, everyone. I was gonna say good morning, but I just got here. My name's Tom Burdett, from West Rutland, and I'm the vice chair of House Judiciary.
Hi there, I'm Esme Cole and I represent Hartford and I'm on Human Services.
Hello, my name is Zahn Eastis. I represent Guilford and Vernon, the South. I'm on Human Services.
Doug Bishop from Colchester on Human Services.
Hi, I'm Dan Noyes on Human Services, represent Woolkit, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere.
Tom Oliver, House Judiciary, I represent Swanton and Sheldon.
Alicia Malay, I represent Proctor and Pittsford and Judiciary.
I'm Ian Goodnow. I represent Brattleboro and I'm also on House Judiciary.
Zach Harvey, I represent Castleton, and I'm also on House Judiciary.
Hi, Todd Nielsen, I represent Brandon Forestdale. I'm on Human Services.
Hi, Jubilee McGill. I represent Bridport, Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge, and I'm on Human Services.
I'm gonna run out of ideas.
Yeah. See what else?
Must be some games we can play.
Spy.
And normally in a delay, we would go offline, but that would, be counterproductive to what we're trying to get done.
Almost there.
All right, no. All right. Don't worry. Well, maybe there's a hurry, right?
Yeah.
No,
Switch it.
we have all sections.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that what it is? Oh, man.
Banana.
How many weeks till crossover?
I don't know.
All right.
And then you usually reach it over my desk.
All right, I think. Good. All right.
Thank you,
Back over to
Lori.
you, Deputy Commissioner.
All right, so let's go on to slide number 2. So this first slide provides the mission of the Family Services Division. Our goal is to make sure that children and youth in Vermont are safe from abuse and neglect, and that their basic needs are met, to support youth with justice system involvement, to follow a more productive and law-abiding path. And our aim is to really achieve our child welfare mission while keeping the child and youth at home with their family, which is really much less intrusive and much less disruptive for the child as well as the parent. However, sometimes that's not possible. And for the child, in order to be safe, sometimes we do need to have them out of the home. And that's when the child would come into DCF custody. Generally, that would be foster care or kinship care or under a conditional custody arrangement. And at this time, the parents are offered supports and services, all with the ultimate goal of reunification, which is really important to us. But at times, reunification is not possible. And our division then works to find permanency, safety and security, things that all children need and deserve, other means such as adoption and guardianship. So FSD has over 400 dedicated and hardworking staff. And we have an operating budget of $148 million for fiscal year 24. The structure of the Family Services Division is pretty straightforward. There are 12 district offices located throughout the state, and that serves as the base of operations for our family services workers. There are 2 statewide direct service units. That's the Centralized Intake and Emergency Services Unit, known as CIES, and also the Residential Licensing and Special Investigations Unit, known as RLSI. And then finally, their central office in Waterbury, where leadership is located and where the team provides support for the district offices. We oversee policy and planning, manage budgets, grants, and contracts for the division. And we also maintain communication for our federal partners. So then I want to talk about CIES. That's our 24/7 call center, and it's set up to take intakes of child abuse and neglect. In 2024, the call center handled over 19,000 reports. The majority of the reports are made to the hotline by mandated reporters, educators, healthcare professionals, and law enforcement personnel. The work at the district offices is pretty varied, includes family services workers at the front end, conducting child abuse investigations. And it's important to note that we're doing an investigation for child maltreatment. The governing statutes and policies that drive our work, they really underline what we need to do. The question always boils down to safety. Is the child safe? And if not, what needs to happen to ensure safety? In terms of the other district offices for workers, we have workers that handle ongoing cases. That's based on the results of child safety interventions. And we also do have some districts that have workers with caseloads limited for youth that are involved in the juvenile justice system. The other investigatory arm of FSD is RLSI, and that unit focuses on regulated facilities and schools and licensing foster homes. So as I mentioned, sometimes promoting safety does involve bringing a child into DCF custody. Our most current data shows that some 87% of children in DCF custody are there for reasons of abuse and neglect. Children in DCF custody live in a variety of placements, include foster homes with relatives, pre-adoptive homes, and home, or in residential care. I do want to draw your attention to one data point I'm especially proud of. You'll see in 2024, we had 34% of our children living with kin, which is an over 10% increase from past years. And that highlights the excellent work of our standard of care unit that's located in the central office. Research shows that when children are placed with kin, they have much more positive outcomes generally because it lessens placement instability. So that's a number we're continuing to build on it, but it's something that I think is just excellent work on the part of our family services workers.
So, quick question, the at home, what is that?
I even have an asterisk here because I knew somebody was going to ask. There's a small number of kids that will be at home, and we keep them in our custody so that they can continue to get the supports and services that they would not otherwise be able to have if they weren't in DCF custody. But it's a very limited number.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the more unusual things talking about youth justice, I'm leading up for Ms. Boudreau and Mr. Marvel here. One of the unusual things in Vermont is that our child welfare agency and our juvenile justice agencies are combined. That's not typical. Most states have them separate. So that gives us the opportunity to really look at our kids in terms of if they have a justice involved issue and they may be in custody, sort of looking at them holistically and being able to have relationships with them throughout the course of their time in custody. Now, in terms of juvenile, the work we do at the juvenile justice part of it, that does include supervising youth who are on probation for committing delinquent acts. And for us, in working with youth to promote law abidance, we do take an approach that's rehabilitative. We want to encourage youth and emerging adults to take responsibility for their actions and make amends for those people that they've harmed, but at the same time, providing supports and services and treatment that they may need in order to turn their lives around and become productive adults. So now I will turn it over to Lindy, and so they can go ahead and talk more in depth about the juvenile justice work we do here in Vermont.
Thank you. So as many of you may know, since 2015, 2016, Vermont's been undergoing significant changes in relation to juvenile jurisdiction. We kind of tagged it raise the age now, but throughout the course of those past 10 years, there's been a lot of different changes that have happened. So it hasn't just been about expansion of the juvenile jurisdiction, but it's also been expansion of our youthful offender status and population, and we'll speak to that today as well. But it's also been an opportunity for us to look at, as a state, opportunities where we can provide off-ramps, which is kind of the lingo that we've used over the years, opportunities for alternatives to traditional prosecution for youth. And so this list here of various opportunities that we've provided in statute and in community-based services to youth so that we don't have to send them to court. So the first option is a pre-charge program, court diversion, of course. I'm sure many folks are aware of that. There's an option for youth to have a direct referral to an approved community-based provider instead of having traditional prosecution or probation rather. Then there's juvenile probation, which is supervised by us at DCF. And then there's juvenile probation with DCF custody. So when Erica was just speaking about youth who may need to have a higher level of intervention from the state and be removed from their home, or at least have the custody status sit with DCF, that also extends to our juvenile population. So when we're working with youth who are on juvenile probation, what that means is that we at DCF are over court order conditions. And so we provide the supervision, the support, we meet monthly with the youth and their care team. So we'll typically have youth and their family, and then any kind of care provider that may be working with that youth and supporting that youth to achieve the conditions of probation. So typically supervision ends at age 18 for youth who begin, or whose offense, I should say, starts prior to age 16. As part of the extension or the changes that we've been making through jurisdiction over the past few years, we've also extended probation terms. So for youth who are 16 or 17 at the time of the offense, they have the ability to have their supervision with DCF extend to age 19 and a half. For 18-year-olds, that time frame extends to age 20 and a half. It doesn't mean it has to happen, but it can happen. So if that youth is in a place where they require more supports, the system is able to go beyond the 18th birthday to continue to provide some supports to reduce that youth's risk. Another change that we made over the past few years was adding a presumption of diversion language to statute for youth who have non-Big 11 offenses. And so we use a screening instrument in Vermont for all the agencies that work with justice involved youth. So that's court diversion, DCF, and our balanced restorative justice provider network to provide an assessment of risk and need. And so the statute says that if a youth who is low or moderate risk as determined by that screening tool, there's that presumption of diversion. That presumption can be overcome by the state's attorney if they state on the record why a diversion referral does not meet the ends of justice.
Yes, Representative Noyes.
Thank you. Before you leave this slide, I just had a question about youth opting to stay under. They can have supervision to age 19 and a half, 18-year-olds. Why? And what services and supports would the department be able to offer them?
So that's typically decided by the court.
Okay,
it's not
justice involved.
Yes, for justice involved youth. So it's not that the youth is saying, I want to, it's that all the parties agree that the probation term is going to be extended to a certain age or time frame. For, as I mentioned, if a youth, so for a youth who may come on to probation closer to jurisdiction ending, so say it's a 17 and a half year old, the system may want some more time to provide them surround community-based services, working with some of our contract providers. We're providing support to that youth, our continued support and supervision. So it just provides you a longer opportunity to be able to make the rehabilitation and reduce the risk so that they're successful moving forward.
Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, so I mentioned the screening instrument. So what we use in Vermont is the YASI, it's the Youth Assessment Screening Instrument. It's an evidence-based risk assessment tool that we began using in 2007. So we've been using it for a long time. The tool is designed to target our case planning efforts and reduce recidivism. It's a holistic tool. It has 10 domains. You can see the domains on the screen. So it's looking at not just the youth's involvement in delinquent behavior, but it's looking at their home environment, their school, their connections, all of those things that really provide opportunities for the youth to have strength. So it's not just a tool that's highlighting all the bad things that the youth has done. We also use this at DCF. We use this in our case planning. So it's a two-phase tool. So it's really been integrated and operationalized throughout our system. The GAZI is based on the risk need responsivity principle, which is really, really basic. You highlight the kids who have the highest risk. You put your interventions and support into those youth. You target the areas of need so that you're making sure that your interventions are responsive in the circumstances that what is presenting. And I highlighted on here the Big 11 and additional exceptions list because we mentioned that there's a presumption of diversion for cases who are not on the Big 11 list. That was a separate handout. It's really hard to kind of put on the screen, but we did provide a separate handout for folks because you'll hear that mentioned quite a bit today.
And that's on the committee websites.
Yes.
Representative Dolan.
And I apologize if this came up before because I came in late, but with the YASI, so we heard from some folks before in testimony of saying maybe there were some downsides of YASI or there's other ones to consider. Share your perspective on why YASI is the instrument that you're using or how you know like it's the instrument you should be using.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, like I said, we've been using the YASI since 2007, and I was actually working for the department when we chose the YASI. And at the time, the big draw to the YASI itself was the fact that it was a youth engagement tool. It has a lot of youth voice in it. So when we look at the tool, when we're looking at case planning, it really brings in the youth perspective. So it's not the system saying these are the things that you need to change. It's really factoring in youth voice, the motivation, the barriers as determined by the youth themselves. And that's really a key component in motivational interviewing and all of those components that are tied into our case plan. So at the time, that was really a big draw. That continues to be true today. In 2011, we did, in Vermont, we did our own validation of the tool to make sure that the way that we use the YASI, there was a few things that we say we Vermonticize about the tool because we're a child protection and juvenile justice agency. We made some small changes, but in 2011, we did the validation study. It is working the way it's supposed to. We just recently did a revalidation study because of concerns around racial disparity. And is this tool targeting youth of color inadvertently? And that the assessment came back that it was not. So over the years, we've made sure that we're still using it in the way that we want to use it and not causing undue harm to the youth.
There's not any concerns from your perspective about the tool?
At this point, no. So, just real quickly, just wanted to talk about the services that are provided to adjudicated youth in this, I guess the question that you were asking earlier. So when we're looking at providing support and treatment to youth through probation, these things are contemplated prior to the youth coming on to probation. But some of the services that we can offer youth are really in the community. And it's, services that anybody else can get for the most part. So substance abuse assessments and treatment, mental health assessments and treatment are typically offered if it's indicated. Certainly working with schools around providing supports to youth. In-home wraparound services, that's a service that can be offered not just when youth are in custody, so the higher level of intervention, but also to avoid that. So we want to make sure that as we're providing supports and services to youth, it's not building up. We want to support them as things start amping up. Should their behavior start, increasing, we want to try to support them before it gets to the point where we need a higher level of system or court intervention. And of course, there's residential treatment if needed.
So before you go on, could you comment perhaps about the availability of those various services? We keep on hearing that that's, this may be something that we want to use, but do we really have enough availability of residential treatment, mental health assessments, et cetera? If you just comment on that.
I don't have exact data, but I certainly know that around the state, it will vary by community. But around the state, this is an issue. There's wait lists. Certainly some communities have longer wait lists, really depends on the availability of services. Like Chittenden County, of course, is going to have more service providers than others, but they also have a bigger population to serve. So we could certainly look into numbers to see if folks could give us like timeframes, like what they're experiencing in their community. But I do know that around the state, this is an issue as far as wait lists and availability of service.
Yeah, I mean, that would be very helpful to understand. It's really, it leads to delaying helping these youth. That's important to know where we may need to put our resources. So Representative Ann Personal.
Along those lines, I'm wondering if it's fair to say that the majority of youth who are justice involved and DCF involved because of being justice involved are needing or receiving community-based treatment versus a more restrictive environment.
If I'm understanding the question, the last piece is throwing me off a little bit.
So I'm wondering if, as we talk about resource allocation, if we're choosing wisely when we devote millions of dollars and a lot of time, many resources to the development of a secure residential facility, a juvenile facility, and perhaps underfund, I won't say neglect, but underfund or these community-based resources. Given that, if I'm checking my understanding, but given that the majority of youth are in need of these community-based treatments versus being housed in a residential locked facility.
I think I understand what you're.
I could say it a lot more simply.
In terms of,
I am talking
X number of youth that may need the highest, most acute level of care that may be in a secure facility versus other youth that may be in a staffed facility, but not necessarily a locked facility, and others that could be just receiving treatment even while living in a foster home.
Yeah.
And so you're thinking about the terms of how much money is going.
Right.
At
Do we
that
have
upper
that
level.
balance correct if we're spending more money on the locked facility for fewer youth?
It's hard to count it looking at it simply by the number of youth, because what happens is, such as we don't have, until we got Red Clover, we didn't have a locked facility at all. So we may be placing our most acute youth in a more mid-level facility. And then that pushes other youth out, and then that may cause more issues in terms of youth not having appropriate places, and then their behavior may escalate. So it really does have a trickle-down effect, even though they may be at the top of the pyramid. So it does make sense to focus on those that are most acute, have a stable, appropriate facility for them, and to continue that way down, making sure we have the appropriate funding level by level, because we really do look at it as a system, because kids then go up and down throughout the levels.
So can I follow up? Oh, so in that, if we're thinking about it that way, that to me sounds like working way downstream and then trying to back it up. But is it possible that we'd need fewer resources downstream if we had more upstream?
So not necessarily what I like to do, and a lot of the things that I do in the division is I have a dual track. So it's why we're still trying to build up what we can at the other levels, but focusing on that top level, because that really does impact everybody else, down the line. So it's sort of an and, it's not an or. But Lindsay, I'm sure you have something.
I agree with that. I was just thinking the same thing as I was mentioning earlier, like you really want to, as behaviors start building. So I'm, like I was just saying, you don't want to wait till they get to this level. You want to try to serve them as they move through the system, if that's what's happening. So it is, I agree with Deputy Commissioner Radke that it's a and, because it's really hard to say that this population versus this population is everybody. And so one of the things, to Erica's point, that we've seen is this trickle down, the impact of that. because of our system of care having fewer resources. And so that's been problematic. I'm really trying to manage the effect of that on the other kids who may be receiving community-based treatment. But because of some of the impact of the shuffling around, then their behavior escalates. So I think it's an and.
Thanks.
So I have a follow-up with this as well. And I guess it's a nice place to talk a little bit about data and what you look at to see where your investments should go and see how you're doing. And what kind of data are you looking at as far as disposition of these various, of the individuals?
Data.
I mean, how do you evaluate how you're doing, I guess? And what kind of data do you have that you look at?
We've been looking at, particularly with Red Clover starting out, who's going in, you know, what brought them in there, how long they're staying, what kind of care they're receiving, and what their next step is to see whether or not, how long they're staying, to make sure we're not having anybody stuck somewhere inappropriately, as well as making sure we don't have someone come in inappropriately. So we're really watching sort of what we call the churn, how people come in and how they exit. So that's one of the things we're doing. And it's really, it's a small program. So we don't have a lot of data yet, but it's important to us that kids aren't coming in inappropriately, that they're at the lowest, least restrictive placement that they can be. And wherever they are, that they can stay as short as appropriate for them and then move on to the next place. So it's a lot of counting who's going in, how long, and where they're going. So that's some of the data we're looking at. And also in terms of how many are in residential treatment versus though, and where they are they out of state? How many are in state? Those are some of the data points.
Yeah, that's kind of information I'm interested in and I guess, well, just a real basic question. How many youth, how many juveniles are under your custody right now, approximately?
You mean total?
Yeah, I mean.
About 900 now.
900, okay.
Very low for us. At the height of the opioid epidemic, I think it was like 1,600, which before I was here, but it was pretty large.
And just one second on that. So with those 900, are you able to say, well, this is the path that 100 of them have gone to substance use, so 5 of them are going to Clover? I mean, is it that kind of breakdown available for us to understand where?
And most of them, about only 10% are actually, in residential treatment. Most of them are in foster care or in kinship care of the 900. So we do know where everybody is, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. It would just kind of give us a sense of how this is working, where people are going, what the disposition is.
You'd be probably most interested though in that, the juvenile justice related kiddos and where they are.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, so
just to be clear, so you're looking for placement, like if they're in residential, that like why they're there.
and if it's in state, out of state, I mean, just trying to understand this population. I think that would really help us. I mean, it'd be nice to see trend data as well, as far as how that may have been changed in the last few years. But Representative Bishop and then Representative Noyes.
Just for myself for clarification, the 900 represents both justice involved and non-justice involved.
Yes.
Kids who are within DCF.
Custody.
Is there any data with respect to how many who come to you through justice involvement, through that process, were already engaged in some way with DCF?
That's harder for our system to, I look for that. I get this question a lot around who might be served through the CHIN system and then convert to a delinquency case. It's really hard for our system to say definitively that they have that prior relationship. I can ask again, but I'm not sure that we're able to do that. I do have the numbers from 2020 to 2024 related to all the different ways that youth are delinquent in our system, and I can explain that when we do the data review. I can provide that for upcoming testimony.
Great, appreciate it. And I assume that also has age breakdown as well.
It does. The limitation for our system is we're not able to associate charges to that. So I can't tell you why they're in. Our system doesn't track.
That'll all be fixed soon when you get to the. So Representative Noyes.
Just to build on that, how many of the 900 are out of state placements? And is that something we could see like what states those are?
I
Where they're
know.
housed?
We should be able to do that. I know we can get the info about how many are out of state. So, and we do know where they are, so it should be pretty easy to
Yeah.
tell you
I was just
where they
wondering
are.
how far they are
Most
from
in-
home.
We have, Florida is a place we've been using a fair amount, Tennessee. And I think there's a couple of places in New England. Is that true?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm wondering about your contracts with out-of-state companies and how you account for youth care, especially when they are maybe perhaps LGBTQ or another marginalized population. There are disparities around the country and how we treat those populations and the autonomy we give them. So I'm just wondering how you navigate that in other states that may not have all of the same protections and rights to their own citizens.
Sure. Our specialized services unit in central office has a team of folks who visit all of the youth in residential care once a month, at least once a month. Some of those folks they're participating in the team meetings that they have, the treatment team meetings. They're working with our social workers who are also doing monthly face-to-face with those youth around care plans, treatment plans, discharge planning, all of those things throughout the time that the youth is in residential care. So that's the system's response in relation to both our central office staff who are supporting our field staff. The central office staff, the other role of the specialized services unit is to monitor, manage that contract. That's their role. That's the difference between our social workers who are tasked with overseeing the youth themselves, but the specialized services unit does that and the contract with the facility.
Okay, and things like gender and sexual orientation and identities respected in other states, is that protected as part of your contracting?
I'm not sure in terms of what language would be in the contract, but I'm just thinking of specific youth when we discuss a kiddo that may be going out of state. Those types of issues are absolutely at the forefront of our mind, and we talk about them and think about them in terms of where potential placements might be. And talking about the specialized services unit that does travel to see kiddos monthly, they really are road warriors. They go out. It's not a sort of a high and by. They really do get to know the kids and make sure as best they can how they're doing, how they're faring in these placements. And then there's also a lot of planning when it's time for them to come home to make sure there's a transition that works for them, because we want to make sure that the transition is successful. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it.
So, yeah, Representative Burdick.
Yeah, the Florida thing kind of got me. But I think you may have just answered it. Is it for specialized care?
The two Florida placements I'm thinking of are, yes, far more residential. I believe they are PRTFs, is that correct? So yes, more specialized care for certain youth that have to go there that we may not in Vermont have the type of care or a facility that can provide the care that they need.
Right, and I'm going to assume nothing closer. The reason it pings with me is because in years past, there was, of course, I'm going to be talking corrections a little bit. People would, they didn't like the idea of prisoners being as far away as Tennessee, and those are adults. And we're sending children as far away as Florida. So I'm going to assume there's nothing closer for the specialized care, I guess.
Yeah, it all depends on what condition or what treatment or needs the child has. So that's really the motivating factor for us. But we are working on trying to get a psychiatric residential treatment facility here in Vermont, because we do want to bring as many youth back as possible, provided we have a situation that can help them with their needs. Because it is better to have kids here where they're close to their support networks, because that helps them in their healing as well. So it's a concern.
Yeah. So the road warriors you brought up, I mean, what part of a week, a month, a year are they on the road?
Annette, do you know how often she's traveling?
I'm just a guesstimate.
I mean,
Yeah,
she's-
yeah, we're
I think
thinking
she's
of-
the majority of the time, these folks, that is their role.
Yeah.
Is to monitor the programs that support the youth and see the youth in the programs every month. So they're on the road majority of a week. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Just a couple other data points while we're talking data. So this also comes from Representative Rachelson, who's not able to be here, but just asked me to ask this question. If you could if we could have the cost per night for these different options, these residential programs, as well as whether they're nonprofit or profit organizations. I think that would be helpful for us to understand. And just to follow up with what you just were talking about, Deputy Commissioner, really understanding the efforts to bring more of these services into the state. If there's more data or information that you can provide on that.
Absolutely.
Over to Barge now, right?
Okay, great. So Barge, Balance and Restorative Justice Services. So this is the program. This program is funded by DCF. It's a contract that we have with all 12 of our district offices. So all 14 counties are covered. So Barge is a significant program for justice involved youth. They also serve youth who are on the cusp of becoming justice involved. So we call this the at-risk or the truant population. So they have a broad group of folks that they can provide supports to. The one way to think about Barge is this is our effort of trying to provide some prevention services to this population. Of course, DCF is a reactionary system when it comes to youth who are justice involved, but Barge really can jump in when some of these behaviors are kind of propping up and provide some supports and services to hopefully reduce state involvement. And that is the goal of this contract. So Barge provides restorative processes to youth. So that could be restorative panel, circle process. They provide case management, so it can be a long-term support for youth and families. They provide restorative classes and skills development. So when there's concerns about maybe victims, for example, they can do victims work if that's agreeable to the victim and the youth. They do prevention and community outreach. So they, across the state, the program is the services that they provide are all the same, but how they apply them is very broad, if that makes any sense. So like in one county, for example, in Bennington, they do movie nights on Friday nights because in one specific apartment complex, because that's when certain kids were getting in trouble. So they decided to have a movie night and bring them together and have a different community gathering. So the kids were together, supervision, and it really changed the course of that community. So that's just an example of some of the community supports that they provide. And they also provide the YASI screenings for the most part for DCF. So for the pre-screen. So when we talked about the presumption of diversion at the beginning, that's the pre-screen, and Barge oftentimes, and most of our districts will do that for DCF because there's a lot of. And so, like I said, Barge is a really significant player when it comes to providing supports to at-risk and justice involved youth for DCF. And another piece.
Can I ask before you move on from Barge? So is that done in conjunction with community justice centers, or are they, how does that?
No. So community justice centers, the services that they provide are typically funded by DOC. The interesting piece, and this is what gets complicated when we talk about court diversion Barge in the community justice centers, is those contracts. So for example, 10 of the 11 contracts that we have for Barge sit with the court diversion program. So there's overlap, but the services are different. So the agencies may hold the same, the work, but the services are different. So as we've made some changes around the state with service providers, I think now we're up to 6 providers that have all 3. So because of those joint efforts and initiatives in Vermont to provide supports to the folks in Vermont in kind of a seamless way when it comes to restorative processes, Willa from the court diversion program through the AGO and Derek Miadovnik at DOC and myself meet monthly. So the 3 RJ funders meet to talk through this and really try to work through any issues that may come at the community level because of the overlap. But they are separate programs. Go ahead.
Thank you. Does Barge currently meet the need So is it like funded where it's meeting the need that's there, or is there like a wait list or?
Yeah, so in some counties, there's a wait list. Some counties, they don't have a wait list, they just don't accept referrals. So that's how they manage it. I would say that they are not able to meet the current needs of the community. So the barge program is very broad as far as the referrals that they can take. Some counties really have to limit truancy, for example, because it would just become the entire caseload if you offered that. So they're not able to meet the need in that way. Barge could certainly expand their services and their outreach with additional funding. Something else. I forgot what I was going to say. The last thing I was going to say about barge. I apologize.
Well, I thought we were done with barge.
No, I was something else I was going to say. I made it a bullet and I would have remembered. So any other questions about? And so the last piece that we'll talk about on this slide related to services is the support and supervision from family services. So this includes at least monthly face-to-face visits from our staff, provide, again, supervision and supports to not only the youth, the family, their broader team, but also to the court in relation to how the youth is doing in compliance, I don't like the word, but in compliance with their probation terms, really. As I just mentioned, the family team meetings, we really try to make sure that we're taking a holistic approach around supporting the youth. It's not just focused on the youth. We want to make sure that they're able to get the supports and services they need. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. So having their family, having their natural supports a part of that process really provides for better outcomes. We also make sure that we're providing referrals for services. If the youth is in our custody, that sits squarely with us. If they're not, we just make sure that the guardian is able to get those referrals done, or we can do the referrals for them. And of course, monitoring engagement and services. If there's a change in behavior, do we have to look at other areas? Is there a new referral that needs to happen? Is there an assessment that is missing? All of those things are things that we're monitoring on a monthly basis. And of course, I just mentioned previously that we're the conduit to court. So we're amongst the other parties, but we're the folks that are letting the court parties know if there's a concern.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we heard earlier about some of the options available for conditions, probation conditions, and that any violations of juvenile probation would, as you just said, the court would be made aware of those violations through a report. I don't know if report is the right word, but made by DCF. So the implication there, and I think it was even stated explicitly, was that DCF has quite a bit of discretion when it comes to making that report. I wonder if you can say anything about how decisions are made as far as, reporting violations, how youth are engaged to make better choices, or if DCF is able to help provide better choices, things like that. Just wondering how that process works.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I've been working for the division for almost 32 years. Throughout that time, certainly seen ebbs and flows in practice. One of the things that I'm actually very proud of is the fact that I don't feel like we're really heavy on VOP, on violation of probation. We are trained social workers. We're not trained probation officers. So I think we bring different perspective, which is really around, can we have a social worker intervention that can get to the risk? I mean, that's really what the violation of probation is about. It's not about a gotcha. We're going to send you back to court. We're not going to get what we're looking for in that. We're really looking to address the issue that's coming up. Is it a safety concern? Is it a new charge, for example, that may require a new referral? We don't need to go to court for that. It may just be that we say to the youth, like, oh, maybe, we weren't targeting the right intervention. So go back and do a YASA reassessment, see what it's telling us, talk to the youth, like, what is the motivation? What are your barriers, or what's not? And so a few years back, we also, as part of some of the changes that we were making over the years, added some language related to graduated sanctions. And we did that so that it can be another more formal step, if you will, to having a systems response to a concern that's related to essentially a violation of probation. And so that's a practice that we never really did. That was really felt like DOC kind of practice, you know. But we did it, and through that, we'll have a youth come in, maybe, you know, talk through what happened, what's going on. They might do a service learning project. I mean, some of the things that Barge does with them, that could be a result of a graduated sanction. Where we need a violation of probation in a formal response from the court is if we're looking to modify their probation conditions or seek DCF custody. Maybe it's something that's so extreme that we feel like we need that level of intervention. Or if the changes that we're looking to make restrict their liberties. Like, we can't add curfew as a graduated sanction. That has to come from the court. We can't say, oh, you need to, you know, do restitution. We can't do those things. That has to come from the court. But I do feel like in my role, in our policy, and how we work, we try not to lean heavily on violation of probation.
And so would you say that the graduated sanctions come close to sort of like creating a more objective approach in a way? I'm thinking about, you know, racial disparities that we're aware of, and wondering how you can mitigate for those.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that not sure how many graduated sanctions folks do. I think people are really just used to bringing the youth in. Let's have a meeting. Let's talk about what's going on versus having like a formal, like doing a form. So it's still, I would say, more of a newer process as far as doing the actual graduate sanction form and putting it in a file versus just let's talk about what happened at a team meeting with your mental health provider, with your parent, with, you know, those folks who are here to help support you and keep you safe. I feel like that's the majority of the time how things are managed. But I can certainly talk, you know, get some anecdotal information from folks around the use of graduated sanctions, if that would be helpful.
Okay.
Representative Dole?
Yes, I knew I had another Yazzie question. I remembered what it was. So in one of our previous presentations that we heard this morning, it was shared that the Yazzie screening is optional for youth. Maybe it was for misdemeanors or something. Like, for a group of youth, it's optional. They could choose to take it. And if they did the screening and came up with low to moderate risk, could be sent to diversion or something else outside of this, so not have to go through the family court process. I'm like, okay, that's great. Creates options. But the optional piece made me thinking, okay, well, how much is that being used? So I don't know if that's a you question or if that is a court question of what percentage of the folks that could be using the Yazzie are using it, so that we are really determining, are all routes being used best that they could?
The statute doesn't say optional. It says they will be afforded the opportunity to take the Yazzie. Okay. The difference between delinquency and youthful offender is that when we were building up the language for youthful offender, we added language that said that the youth who are seeking youthful offender consideration shall do the Yazzie. If they don't, then the department's report back to the court is that they will not be afforded youthful offender status. So there's a little bit more of a hook for YO. So I think that's why people think that it's not optional for them. They still can say they're not going to engage, but there's a consequence. Yeah, there's not a consequence for delinquency. I wish that more folks would offer the assessment to delinquent youth. It's offered when we know about it. We will certainly do it. But the purpose of doing it early is to inform the state's attorney around the decision of it. Where should this case go? When I did that slide that talked about the different options, pre-charge, certainly court diversion, the Yazzie is intended to inform that decision. So it's hard when it's not done early on.
Who is the decision maker gets to implement it? I just feel like that's a really key decision point. And that our youth informed enough to know, like, yeah, do the Yazzie because you might lead to a good outcome.
I would suggest, I think it was last year or the year before, the statute was silent on who notifies the youth that they have this opportunity, whether it's a delinquency or that they have this chance to do it and that there's a consequence in youthful offender. The legislature added language that the court would notice the youth in useful offender cases. I had hoped that the same language would be put into delinquency statute, and it wasn't. So I think if there was a standard place for notification, then it would happen.
Thanks.
Any other questions on this slide? Okay, so this is where it gets confusing. But I've been tasked with making it easy. So I don't know, we'll see what my report card is after this. So this is the jurisdiction chart. I know that there's been a lot of conversations in committee around how does the youth come in, where do they go, Big 11, there's all of these different things. So in an attempt to try to make this kind of easy or streamlined, this is just a point of reference. So I'll use the example of a 15-year-old who's committed a simple assault. So that situation happens. If you look at this chart, you'll see that it's a misdemeanor charge. It's not a big 11. It's not a felony charge. So those cases start in the family division. And so again, it's age specific and it's charge specific. And that's where some of the confusion comes in. But if you look here, it's a non-big 11. That case stays in family court. There's no option for that case to be transferred to criminal division. So that's like the easy piece, essentially. But again, like I said, it changes when you look at other offenses, and that's what I think it's confusing. So the next example will be a 17-year-old who commits aggravated domestic assault. That charge is a non-big 11 offense, but it's a felony. So that charge comes in, starts in the family division. At that time, there's two choices. Is the case going to remain in the family division and be charged as a delinquency? Or is that case going to be charged up, as we call it, to criminal division? And so it has the opportunity to go two different ways. So if the case stays in family division as a delinquency, then that's it. If it doesn't, if it goes to the criminal division, then there's a hearing there. Any of the parties there can say they want the case to come back to family division and be considered for youthful offender status. And we're going to talk about youthful offender status in a minute. But in years past, there was a lot of talk about the ping pong effect. This is the ping pong effect. So it's this charge up, charge down. And so that still isn't, there were some small changes that were made to that statute. This still is primarily a problem in our system. And the easiest example is one where you have a 16-year-old or 17-year-old who commits a sexual assault. That is a big 11 charge. That charge starts in the criminal division. That case can stay in the criminal division, as we just mentioned. It can also be charged, or anybody again can motion for that case to come back to family division for youthful offender consideration. It also, this is not confusing enough, can come back to the family division as a straight delinquency. It's very rare that that happens, but it is an option. So I just want to mention it. How confusing is it?
Yeah, we had an hour of that this morning.
I was gonna say.
So
Check with you, see if you're consistent in previous presentations.
consistent. So yeah.
So far.
I know Judge Davenport is probably going to talk about it tomorrow because she'll have the same chart. So these will look very familiar.
Repetition is helpful.
There you go. Great. So that was the juvenile delinquency, or what we've been calling now has become raise the age population. So we'll shift to our youthful offender population. So the youthful offender cases, as I just mentioned, those cases can start in the criminal division, they can start in the family division, but either way, the process or the court that has jurisdiction over those is the family division. So as the case is being adjudicated and handled, it sits in the family division. So youth who are successfully complete their youthful offender probation will start out their life with hopefully fewer collateral consequences as a result of that charge. Because the case is, for the most part, held confidential in the family division. If it starts in criminal, there's a record of it, but for the most part, the case is shielded from public view. So a big difference between youthful offender cases and delinquency cases is that there's dual supervision by Family Services and Department of Corrections. So two state agencies provide support and supervision to those youth. Another significant difference is that supervision can occur on those cases up until the youth turns 22. When I mentioned the changes that we made in statute a few years ago, I think it went into effect in 2018. We added the availability for youth up until the age of 21 to be considered for youthful offender status. Our previous statute ended at 17 or through the age of 18 or to the age of 18, I should say. So that opened it up to a significant population of young people in Vermont that can be served under WIO statute. As I mentioned earlier, there is a presumption of diversion similar to delinquency cases in youthful offender as well. So for big non-11 offenses, we score lower or moderate on the YASI. There's a presumption of diversion. Again, only the state's attorneys can overcome that presumption. Questions? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you describe the range of supervision?
Yeah, do you want me to do that now or do you want?
No, you got it covered.
Okay. A couple of other things that have changed over the years with youthful offender is that we've had language that says in Vermont, if a youth has youthful offender status, they do not have a duty to register as a sex offender. That is not the same if the youth goes out of state. And we have a lot of youth who are on supervision where an offense may have happened here, but they live out of state or go to college. And that's been something that has come up as an issue. So I just want to point that out, that there's protections in Vermont, but that does not extend out of state. There is an option for direct filing. So when we expanded the eligibility for youthful offender, we created what we call a youthful offender petition in family divisions. So a state's attorney can choose to file a case directly in family division, which means it's from the beginning, it's protected. It never has to be filed in criminal division. As I mentioned a minute ago, youth are eligible for consideration for youthful offender status through the age of 21, which was the big expansion that we made in 2018.
Lindy?
Yeah.
Have you seen, what kind of change in caseload have you seen with that expansion in terms of cases per worker?
It was a significant increase to the number of youth who were seeking youthful offender status. So the year before this passed, we had 34 cases statewide. The next year we had 504, and that's for consideration. So we all time we changed the process significantly. So it used to be that there was a conditional plea of guilty. So the case came from criminal division to family division, already ready for disposition, which means it's ready for kind of the outcome. That process, we ended that. And so we started with the ability to motion down for youthful offender status. And we start with what we call a consideration hearing. And so we created a new process where we're providing the court with information around the suitability for this status. So if that's granted, then they go to the merits hearing and then they go to disposition. So it backed up the process quite a bit because we added those additional steps, but the 504 is the number of youth who are seeking status. It's not the number who were actually given youthful probation.
So I guess my follow-up to that is that, so I recognize that there was a change in process, a change in the definition of a status, if you will. Did that really change appreciably the actual number of youth that DCF saw? So would those youth have been there anyway, only under a different status, a different named status?
Right. Yes and no. So when we expanded that, it went from, we wouldn't have served those youth from the start as a youthful offender at age 18. The previous statute stopped that. So they weren't eligible for youthful offender status or consideration post 18. So that was there's all those youth coming to us that previously would only have been served in the criminal division. So it did increase that. The other reason I mentioned the consideration process is because DCF is tasked with writing that report. So for all of those youth, we write those reports to the court. And we file the court, we attend the hearings, all of that. So it did provide additional workload at the outset. Like I said, as that case moves through the process, it may not come out. The court may not find that they're appropriate for youthful offender probation, but there's additional workload that was front-ended for DCF that wasn't there before.
On the assessment and
Yes.
recommendation
Of the report.
piece of it.
Yes.
So I'm not sure you like totally answered the question.
We still, our caseload of youthful offender cases did increase. The problem with our system is we can't differentiate between a delinquency case and youthful offender case other than by age. And the data that we will present to you shows what we call like pending delinquencies. And so the reason we include that data is because that I know is the population of youthful offender cases that are pending consideration. So that's where we see a large number of those cases. We didn't have those before. So that's one of the ways that I know that those are the cases that are waiting, youthful offender cases that we've written a report on or are writing a report on, and we're waiting to go through the process of consideration and merits to see if they're going to get youthful offender probation. At that point, though, their case type will change. But that we include that number in our data because that we know is youthful offender cases that we're working with because we're a party from the beginning. So we're attending all hearings and all of that work.
And so what prevents you from delineating the different statuses by age? Well, I mean, other than age, you said you.
So it would require a new case type. So every time I've asked, and I keep asking, is that our IT folks have said that it's such a lift because of the fact that they can come into custody. It would have to change like 128 different screens or something like that. It's never anything that I was able to get through the IT priorities. I don't know if our current commissioner can do that, but previous commissioners were not able to get that through. And that's the process that we had to go through. They were not able to create a case type is what I've been told.
So follow up as far as that data. I mean, so you have the number seeking youthful offender status. Do you also have the number of those granted?
Yeah, I can't say, we use court data, like I'll rely on court data to say the number of youthful offenders. DOC certainly has the number of youthful offenders because they're duly supervised. Our system, I can't tell.
From DOC or the court, we can probably get that. So, and would we be able to get that by county as well? Someone.
We have a what's called YOMS, Youthful Offender Management System, and we track all that. It's easier for us because they're not in custody with us, so there's no question of what their involvement with us is. We get them because they're youthful offenders.
So if you could make a note to yourself that, I mean, so next week we're going to be taking up raise the age as well. And information that would be helpful is the youthful offender, if it's possible to have the request for that status and then how many are granted on a county by county basis.
I mean, I can tell you what we have now. I have the report.
Oh, okay. So is that something we have online or that you could provide that we could?
No, I just brought it with me. I
Okay.
didn't know if anyone was going to need it.
Okay.
You don't have status on there though, do you? You just have adjudications.
I only have, we have investigations, but I don't know if it's the number of investigations that have been gone through the court. I just know they're the ones we've received notice of. I wouldn't be able to confirm that, but I can pretty confidently tell you the ones that are the ones that adjudicate full offender status. Yeah, and currently we have 132 in our system.
Okay.
And I can by county as well. We have that. But
Yeah, if you can give that to our committee assistant, he can get it scanned and online. I don't think you have to walk us through that, but just if we have that. Thank you. Over.
Any more questions on that? Okay. Let's see. Oh, as I mentioned earlier, we were talking about the Yazzie and kind of requirement, if you will, to do it. The youth is afforded the opportunity to have that done within 15 days of notification. Another thing with the youthful offender statute is that we built in timeframes because we wanted it to be a quicker response because kids can age out. So a youth who comes in at 21 years old, if the court process kind of is slower in that county, the youth may lose the opportunity to have youthful offender status because of the amount of time that the court takes to get through the process. And so we wanted there to be, we didn't want some of these requirements to bog down the youth opportunity to get youthful offender status. So we built in some pretty clear timeframes.
Before you go on, are they meeting those timeframes?
I would say that, well, the beginning piece is yes, that the court notification goes out. So that's the initial notification related to the motion or the filing. And then Barge responds with a notice of report, is what we call it, within the 15 days. The youth is sometimes it's hard to get the youth in within 15 days because we may have an old phone number. If the youth is not from Vermont or is here visiting or something like that, sometimes it's hard to track the youth down. We really try to be creative in having Barge do outreach, have our workers reach out to the attorney, to the state's attorney, say, does anybody have an accurate number for this youth? Yeah, that's where it becomes problematic, is when the information we have may be older or no longer current. But other than that, even with that, our report is still due, follow those 30-day timeframes. The court process may not happen within that 30 days. So there's lag there. We have some cases where it's taking, months, a year to get to merits in some of these cases. So there is definitely a delay in the timeframe for the court to get to an adjudication, both on the business side and useful offender side. So in these circumstances, one of the things we wanted to make sure, and this is a big difference between the the delinquency and youthful offenders, that victims can attend all hearings when it comes to youthful offenders. There's a public safety portion is one of the first tiers of youthful offender consideration. And if the court can't find that the public safety will be afforded by treating the youth as a youthful offender, the case doesn't proceed. For youth who are ages 18 to 21, that portion of the hearing is open. So that portion, I'm not sure how many cases, I'm not sure if you know this, Gary, or not, but I'm not sure how many times folks have afforded themselves to attend that part of the hearing. I know it's happened a couple of times, but that is a difference. And then the biggest difference with youthful offender is accountability. Should the youth not have success in meeting the conditions of their youthful offender probation, there is a process where the parties can ask for the youthful offender status to be revoked. If the judge grants that, then the case is returned to criminal division. The adjudication is treated as a conviction and it goes immediately to sentencing. So that is the biggest difference. And that's a higher level of accountability for these cases. Questions on that? So the question that was posed earlier, the service provision, another difference between youthful offender status and delinquency cases is that because we have two agencies, there's this notion of lead agency. And so typically for youth who are 18 or over, DOC is lead agency. I will say for us at DCF, there's not much difference because we still have requirements of our staff that they meet with these youth every month. We encourage folks to do it jointly with DOC, so there's less opportunity for splitting. So if youth are working, we're not pulling them out of work or those things that really are protective factors for the youth. So we really want strong collaborations between the two departments to be able to support the youth in a more holistic way. Up until the point of disposition, DCF holds the case pretty much in its entirety. So we're responsible for writing the reports. We're the conduit to family court. We do any of the paperwork. We attend all the hearings. DOC comes on board once the youth is adjudicated. And so that's when this is super. So it's a little bit of, it's family services heavy throughout the process. And when DOC joins, Gary can talk about what they're able to provide. It is a little bit different as far as what DOC can provide for supervision for youth than what we can.
Linda, what's the caseload like terms of for the average caseload for a worker handling these cases?
They're combined with, the delinquency in our system. Our staff carry some CHINS cases, the at-risk cases, the delinquency cases and the YO cases. So it really depends on district. Some districts have one person doing it, so they may have 30. Other districts may have a unit of 4, so those may be more spread out. So those social workers may only have 15 cases. It really depends on the district makeup, but that's the other piece with this staff. They don't just carry youthful offender delinquency cases. They carry the youth beyond the control of their parents and the truancy cases. So there's other CHINS cases that this population of staff serve. So we could.
So you're saying it's like a range of 15 to 30-ish, is that it?
I would say, yeah.
Follow up to that, is there a number that's best practice, the optimal number?
Well,
Yeah.
Wow, okay, thank you.
Gary, do you want to talk about?
We have a case,
DOCs?
yeah, we have a caseload cap for risk management cases of 45. That's statutory. We did have a youthful offender probation position, but we've never had the economies of scale to justify it really. So that has a lower caseload cap, but we don't have enough. That's a cap at 25, but we generally don't have that many. I mean, like for example, like our largest county right now is St. Albans, has 26 that we're involved in, and that's one caseload. That would be one caseload for that position. So I imagine the situations the other thing that's worth mentioning is we also follow the risk needs responsibility principle, and we are very much social working nowadays too. I'm a social worker as well. So we don't want to over supervise youth. If you're low risk and you're not on for a listed crime or a sexual crime or a domestic violence crime, we might very well put you on what's called an administrative supervision caseload, where you're basically you're checking in maybe periodically, and you're mostly doing telephone reporting. So then you go on a larger caseload, because we know we do worse outcomes for kids if they're low risk and we're seeing them too much. We're over criminalizing them. DCF is still going to see them once a month, but only cases that have higher needs or higher risk are we going to see, and we can see them up to 4 times a month if necessary, down to 1 time a month on the risk management caseload.
So Representative Cole and Representative Dolan.
Thanks. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on why females is under the specialized assessments category there.
Yeah, they have their own specialized instrument.
Okay.
The risks are different. The instruments developed are different. We have what's called the WARNA, which has better outcomes for predicting need and risk for females.
And how long have those been in place? And
Just got them.
oh, you did? Okay.
Actually, yeah, we have a WARNA work group right now that we're developing practice around that.
And who are the stakeholders kind of involved in developing that?
We have an outside, I'm not involved heavily in the training portion, but I know our officers, we have a cadre of officers that went out of state to get trained in the WARNA. And we have a work group for implementation, for case planning around that instrument that's happening right now in the facility for adult women and as well as youthful offender women. The numbers are very small, though, just to give you, we have 14 youthful offenders in the state right now. Which is I'll just say that's part of the reason why we need a separate risk instrument, because the population is so much smaller. You have to do separate data sets to get any kind of predictability with it.
Representative Dolan.
Sure. So some of the things is there another question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, just trying to piece all these threads together. So I think I heard that caseloads are higher than what is ideal, right? I'd heard that piece of it. Going back to the other thread that we were talking about with the Yazzie, I'm also hearing that the Yazzie maybe is not being used as well as it could be for screening out some people that maybe could go to diversion. Is that correct?
Consistent notification would help.
Okay.
even if the Yazzie is being completed, it doesn't guarantee that the case is going to go to diversion. That sits with state's attorney.
Yeah, but if it's not being used, then it doesn't even open up that door.
It may, just to clarify, it may later. When we get a case, we're also doing the Yazzie, even if it wasn't done initially. Problem is that when we're getting a delinquency case, it's post adjudication. So that decision's already been made. Yeah, and that's just the nature of the beast. We're not parties in a delinquency case until
it's determined. Right. But I'm just trying to think of this caseload piece of it and I don't want to say like, oh, this is the magic wand that's going to fix everything, but it does seem like this could be a piece of it that if folks were getting screened immediately and had the opportunity to go to diversion, if that was a fit, that might bring down some of those numbers. So there's just opportunity there is what I'm hearing to look at.
the opportunity, not just about reduction in caseload, but also about a better fit for the youth.
Yes.
Lower moderate risk youth.
Yeah. Okay, put in a note on this. Big star.
Yeah, go ahead, Representative Goodenow.
Just on that, does the Yazzie require an admission of guilt? Okay, so they can do it at that early stage and if they were to not get referred to diversion, whatever came out of that Yazzie couldn't be used against them.
Yeah, and there's statutory language, both in delinquency and useful offender, that explicitly states that.
So that's not an explanation for why it's not being used or why it's not being.
No, well, why it's not being offered?
Yeah.
Yes, no. Some youth may choose not to engage, and that's for their attorney or just, and that's okay. And we certainly see that sometimes more often in cases involving sex offenses. But there is statutory language to protect youth.
Sure. Yeah, Linda was asking me to just speak to a little bit about some of the stuff we get involved in, and I just made some notes of, for example, if electronic monitoring is needed by the court, wanted by the court as a condition, we would have to be the ones to provide that. That's not a mechanism that Family Services has. So things like GPS monitoring to track, where they're supposed to be, not going somewhere that they're not supposed to be going. We also offer the specialized assessments around DV and sex, because something like a general criminological risk assessment isn't going to tell you much about risk with somebody who has IPV crimes, for example. It's just a very different risk. So you could score very low, for example, on a general tool like our
IPV.
Intimate partner violence. Thanks. I always give her crap. So you would want to get an instrument that's going to really assess properly the behavior and the person's history in relation to that behavior. So like you could be very low on something like the Yazzie or the ORAS, which is our general tool, and score high in IPV or in sex risk. So that's one of the reasons why we do that for the over 18 crowd. We can't offer that for the under 18 crowd because the tools they're not normed for that population. So that's why we only get involved to provide that for the reports for the court in those cases.
Just to clarify, so 18 and above, is that where you can do that?
Yeah, the instruments we use are normed for that population. You can go lower as a clinician, but for a layman who's been trained in the tool, our guidance is that you don't go lower than that. You need a specialized training to be able to tell if it's appropriate.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions about, we also use a graduated sanction chart, by the way. I just wanted to throw that in there. We don't violate or file violation reports to DCF as a first course of action. We generally also try to engage with and use cognitive behavioral interventions to get individuals to shift behavior before we just file a report. The only exception to that would be if it was something that required an emergent return, an incident where public safety is immediately going to be in jeopardy. Otherwise, we're going to want to try to process and work with our folks as well.
Yeah, Representative Arsenault.
I'm wondering, I was thinking about this earlier when our legislative council was running through, as I mentioned, all the different possible conditions involved with probation. I was thinking about, so for every juvenile or youthful offender who receives probation, they have a caseworker at DCF, right? If they're under 18. Given all the things, I know that like 18 number, what we just said would be DLC. I'm going to say DCF. And I know that they're
Have it regardless.
right. Okay. So they would have it regardless. So I'm trying to get a sense of when we're talking about case loads, those are just numbers, which are important, but I'm trying to understand what's involved with each case. And I know I imagine there's a lot of variability. But just to get it, I wonder if you can give us a sense, I don't know how to do this, if it's like hours per individual per month or week or something, but just to try to understand, because we hear a lot about how workforce issues are impacting raise the age. And so I want to try to fill out that picture, fill out my own understanding of the implications and what we're talking about when we say that would be a challenge to move up to 19. So just trying to understand what's involved with supervision.
And it's hard. I try to paint that picture a little bit in here as far as the response and talking about our minimum requirements is that you're going to meet with that youth monthly, face to face. Again, managing referrals, managing, any supports they need. Do they need transportation issues, meeting with bars, meeting with all those folks. That's an easy case in my opinion. And so I would say couple hours a month. So you're having meetings, you're meeting with the youth, you're maybe, making some phone calls to the service providers, making sure things are going well. The reason I mentioned earlier, the fact that this population of our staff doesn't just work with the raise the age population and the YOs is because those other caseloads that they oversee are also growing. And so they're doing all of that. So it's not just how many 19-year-olds or 18-year-olds have come through this process. It's the buildup of the youthful offender caseload. It's the buildup of the trying to not use an acronym, the CHINS side case, the at-risk cases, the truancy cases, or the youth beyond the control of their parents. That coupled together is the larger impact. The other piece is if a youth is in custody with us, our role is kind of doubled because we're acting as their guardian. So those youth, there are additional requirements that we have to meet with those youth. And there may be more there's case planning that's a little bit more solidified in practice. There's maybe more court hearings, but it really comes down to the youth's need. So if you have a caseload, this is why we're trying to move away from having just one person in a district who manages this population, because not only is it isolating, but if you have a couple of kids who are really their behaviors are getting more and more concerning, that's just emergency after emergency, and then you can't focus on anything else. And it's hard to do that if you're just one person. So really trying to provide the best supports to the youth that they're serving in each district. So it's hard. I guess I can do some thoughts on guesstimating for you, but it really is hard because it depends on the youth's presentation. And so you could have a caseload of 15, 10 of those youth are stable. And so it's maybe 5 hours a month with that case. But it's the other 5 where things are putting out fires, or you're doing referral for residential, or you're out of the office 2 days because you need to fly to Texas to see your kid. And so then because that is a requirement for our staff. Even if the youth are out of state, you still have a requirement to see them face to face every month. And so there's some workers who are traveling quite a bit. And so then other workers are covering their court hearings because they're out of state trying to meet the mandate. So it's all of those kinds of moving pieces. But I can do some more thinking about this to try to see how to paint a better picture.
That's helpful, like a day in the life kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably the hardest thing to answer today is a day in the life, but I can think.
I offer a comparison just because I get a lot of feedback from my staff about what it's like to work with the youth population versus like the adult population. And I would say some of the feedback I get is the process that's been highlighted is extremely long, it's extremely lengthy, and it is very heavy. The back and forth, just all the reports are involved. 2, you're not just working with the youth, you're really robustly working with the family. I mean, there's no way to avoid that if you're trying to do effective casework. So every kid isn't one kid, it's an entire family of people, which might involve siblings, which might involve, and then you have all the supports that are tied to that. So there's a lot of context. So what I get told is that generally it's like something in the vicinity of like, you could take an adult risk management caseload of like 45 and if you were to have anything close to that of this population, it would be, somewhere like 3 caseloads. I mean, it's much more robust. The other piece of it is that the time frame is extremely short. I mean, we might have someone in supervision for 20 years and you have maybe 2 or 3. So you have to get a lot done in that time. So the expectation for the worker to follow up is not like, oh, well, a couple of weeks go by and we'll see how it goes. You have to be on people constantly to get that information in to make sure that the report is issued at a time that's going to allow for the case to flow through the court system in the timeframes that you have. So it's intense work and it requires incredible diligence to operate it correctly.
I was just going to add in terms of caseloads too. I mean, talking about the 15 to 30 is more with the JJ cases. I wanted to make sure that our typical caseloads with the 12, that's ideal. Right now, we are running under 12 in general, but it does vary from office to office because some of the offices are fully staffed versus others that aren't. So I did just want to point out that when we do provide caseload data, you may say, hey, this is under 12. They told us it wasn't. If you're thinking more in terms of JJ caseloads, it tends to be higher. But even those caseloads that are under 12, noticing that with the youth, the higher the acuity, you still need to put in that much more attention and focus so that it may be under 12, but it still feels much more intense.
So maybe I should have caught this earlier, but so DOC, the folks that you are working with are 18 and older or also younger than 18?
We're generally the lead on the 18 plus case.
Okay. So, but there are situations where you are having to hold juveniles under 18, is that right?
If you had a youthful offender who, for example, needed electronic monitoring, that was one of the conditions, we could take the lead on that. That doesn't reduce the requirements for family services. It only adds us to the picture. And that's because you'll need someone who knows how to operate the electronic monitoring system. So we'll be involved in that case, but I wouldn't say that, it would be a reduction in work for them. It's just an increase in work for us.
To be clear, what I'm hearing in your question is they're always involved. DOC is always involved regardless of the youth's age because statute says that both agencies will provide supervision. So we both have a supervisory requirement
For youthful offenders.
for youthful offenders. But the bulk of the work in the lead will sit with us, but there's still a requirement for DOC to also meet with that youth. That's why we try to have it done jointly. And that's been one of the things that our field has really talked a lot about as far as success for this population is when there's a really strong collaboration between DOC and DCF. There's that dual response, but it's also really kind of a seamless process because like we mentioned, we have a low risk youthful offender. You have 2 state agencies supervising that youth. We're running the risk of creating a riskier situation than what's present. And so we want to try to eliminate that by having less involvement with the youth, less face-to-face time. If we're having 2 agencies meet with them twice a month, that doesn't make sense. We really try to limit that to let's do this together, provide a more seamless approach to the case.
So maybe somewhat related question, maybe not. This isn't youthful offender question, but so probation violations. Just wondering what happens generally. I guess part of the statutes provide that there could be probable cause to hold the juvenile for a violation hearing. Where would a juvenile be held?
Delinquency case?
Yeah, in the delinquency case.
Well, right now, it would have to be Red Clover is our only facility that is a secure facility.
But DOC sometimes does have to hold a unit. It has to have sight and sound.
That would happen only if if they were charged criminally. So that wouldn't be a delinquency case.
Okay, all right. So where were they held before Red Clover? Just curious.
Originally there would be Woodside. After Woodside closed, it would be through Marble Valley or whatever DOC might have that could provide the opportunity for the youth to be separated from the population.
So this is maybe a bigger question that so some of the pushback just in general on the juvenile justice system is the lack of accountability. And if you have comments on that or any pushback, or maybe it's not pushback, however you want to address it. I mean, I hear that as a criticism, and that's not necessarily age dependent. It could be any age.
Certainly the differences between delinquency and youthful offender status, as I pointed out, there's definitely more accountability with the youthful offender case, and that's because the case does have kind of two tracks. So if the youth does not engage, regardless of age, there is that opportunity for the case to lose the status and to be returned to the criminal division and sentenced. That's definitely a higher level of accountability. And so as we have increased the age of eligibility for cases that will primarily sit in family division as a delinquency case, a little bit. But what I will say is that for youth who have those natural supports and have those systems in place, who are able to engage, it works well. So at the end of that, yes, they can age out, and they do age out. And there's really not much to do about that.
But what about 16 or 17-year-old not in youthful offender status that is not engaging?
That's what I'm talking about. That's the situation I'm describing. So up until the point that they turn 18, a higher level of accountability could be that we ask the court for DCF custody to say, like, oh, their behaviors could be such that supervision is an issue, or they continue to engage in delinquent behavior, and there's something in the home, removing them from the home might be necessary to provide those supports. That could be a level of accountability. Absent that, if a youth is on extended jurisdiction, for example, as we showed at the beginning of this presentation, and they're on supervision until, say, 19 and a half. Once they hit 19 and a half, jurisdiction ends, regardless of whether or not they have completed or complied with their probation. And so it's done. And so
it's done, then they don't go to criminal court at that point. It's just.
So that's the piece that I would assume you're talking about as far as level of accountability. They could not do anything, and their time with us would end at that point, regardless.
Right, so they may start at 16 and they may not do anything for years. But there are, so how does the Green Mountain Youth Campus fit into that kind of scenario? Somebody just not engaging and maybe is a public safety risk.
Erica, talk a little bit about that. I mean, basically it's really around it would need to rise to the level where they would be in a place where they would require either a secure placement, which there's avenues to report for that. Post disposition, the decision would sit with DCF prior to just sits with the court. So there's checks and balances built into statute around a secure facility. But so that case that I just said a minute ago, for a 16-year-old prior to turning 18, the custody piece, I think, is the system's accountability. So as I was talking about the youth's behaviors kind of amping up in public safety concerns, riskier behavior, our system may be able to say through continued intervention with the court, like filing a violation of probation, to say, this is a scenario we feel that in order to be able to address the concerns of safety, we need to pull this youth into custody. And then that would open our system up to provide placement support, such as residential treatment, which could include a placement at.
So we have like 2 minutes before we have to break to get to the floor. I'll let Representative Noyes have the last question.
Thank you so much. Just a question of youth who are exiting justice involved programs or just custody. Do you have a policy around making sure they have access to a government issue ID or a social security card so that they can get housing or a job or anything like that? Because I've run into a couple of them.
Yeah, the government ID piece, I'm not sure about. We do have policy related to social security cards, Medicaid cards, birth certificates, all of that. Very policy 160. If you want a good read, I think it's 20+ pages. It talks about all the different state and federal requirements of our system linked to adolescent youth and youth exiting foster care. That's a really best policy, but.
So you try to help them make sure that they have the documentation they need to be successful?
Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so we will come back at 10 minutes after floor, depending on how late that is, we may have to reschedule you for another day, because I know you have a time crunch as well. But we'll